The anime starts off with a manga artist who narrates that he is afraid to dig too deep into himself. He's afraid of looking into who he is as a person and facing the trauma that is embedded deep inside him. It is for that reason his mangas lack a spark that would make the readers want to read them. Every manga company he's gone to says that his work does not have any specific flaw, objectively speaking, but the writer obviously hasn't poured into them the kind of person he is yet. His work does not reflect who he is as a person. He goes to his room lying around, wondering how things could have been different had he chosen to be better. However, he doesn't feel regret to the extent that he'd do anything about it. He simply breezes by from one day to the other, like a cloud wandering in the sky without purpose. He then goes to his second job as a pizza delivery boy. He loads up the pizzas on his bike and heads on his way to deliver them. On his way to the delivery destination, time suddenly rewinds for a few seconds, and he notices it instantly. As soon as it happens, he becomes tense and starts looking around. He then notices a truck driver coming in the opposite lane that has dozed off. He turns around and chases it as fast as he can, and manages to turn it away from a young boy, but collides with a car consequently. He wakes up at the hospital and narrates how this phenomenon of going back in time happens to him a lot. Every time it does happen, something bad is usually right around the corner. He's made it his mission to ensure that no one is ever hurt whenever he travels back in time. He calls this phenomenon revival. At the hospital, he has a girl going by the name of Ari waiting by him. She tells him that she saw everything and is very proud of him for saving that boy. She works with him at the pizza shop and says that the manager has no problem with what happened as long as he comes back to the shop as soon as possible. Ari talks to him for a bit and realizes that Satoru doesn't like expressing himself much at all, and she wishes that he was a bit more expressive. After the talk, she left him in the hospital, since his condition was pretty good. Later that evening, when he goes back to his home, he is surprised to find out that his mom, Sachiko, was there waiting for him. She says she got worried when she heard the news that her only son got into a car accident. Satoru insists that he's fine and that she doesn't have to look after him, but the mother's mind was made up, and there was no way she was not going to stay with him for the next few days. At night, when Sachiko was watching TV, she came across news about some kidnappings. She tells Satoru if he remembers the time when a serial kidnapping was happening when he was just a kid. He doesn't remember much and just heads to bed. As he's lying there, he recalls that there was indeed a time many of his class fellows were being kidnapped left and right. The prime suspect became a guy known as Yuki, who was just 20 years old at the time. That memory was quite traumatic for him. He didn't feel like he wanted to recall it. As far as he was concerned, Yuki was wrongfully accused. However, there was nothing to be done about it now. The next day, he goes shopping with his mother, and after getting out of the store, revival happens again. He immediately asks his mother to notice if anything is strange. She makes eye contact with a man who was walking with a kid towards a van. He gets in the van, but leaves the kid behind. She knew right there, and then the kidnapping was foiled, because she made eye contact with that person. They come across Ari, and she decides to go home with them to spend some time with Satoru and Sachiko. The next day, Satoru's mother can't shake this uneasy feeling about that kidnapper. She felt like she knew that gaze. It felt familiar with her, down to her very bones. Satoru also looks back into those kidnapping days and recalls the victim. However, Sachiko was the one with the flare, and starts to investigate the man who attempted that kidnapping. She realizes something that sent shivers down her spine. After a bit of looking into it, she concluded that this might just be the same kidnapper from all those years ago who endangered Satoru as a kid. The thought of this man being at large for so long made her tremble. She made a phone call that evening, contacting someone important. However, things don't get a chance to get too far, as that very night she's murdered by a stab through her stomach. She dies wishing she had listened to Satoru all those years ago. Satoru came to the apartment and couldn't believe what he had to witness. He tries to tell his mother to wake up in complete denial, until he finally mustered up the strength to turn her body around and see the stab that penetrated deep into her. To his dismay, a neighbor comes in just at that time, and she thinks Satoru was the one who killed his mother. He makes a run for it, as the cops are now after him. Afraid of being framed, he makes a run for, and before he knows, he wakes up to someplace entirely different, someplace familiar. It took him a while before he could realize this, but he was teleported back in time, all the way back to his childhood, back to when the kidnappings first started. The next episode starts with Satoru attending his old school. He doesn't know which seat is his, and accidentally sits in the wrong one. After being corrected, he finally sits in the right one. He cuts the next class and tells one of his fellow students that he's going to the nurse. Instead, he runs back to his old home as fast as he can and enters it. Not long after getting there, he witnesses the most pleasant sight he could have asked for. His mother came home and asked him what he would like to have for dinner. He's so happy to have shared a meal with her mother that tears started to come down his eyes without him ever realizing, and he even thanked her for the meal. However, the next day, he gets back to wondering about this new reality as he's heading to his school. He wonders if he'll have to relive 18 years of his life like this. If this really is a revival, why is it so long for the first time ever? What calamity is he meant to stop over here? As he is wondering this, he looks at Hinazuki Keo from behind her. She realizes that she was one of the first victims of kidnapping and recognizes instantly what he must do. In class, he notices that her left leg is bruised quite badly, indicating that she was also suffering from domestic abuse at that time. His concern for Hinazuki is interpreted by his classmates as a romantic interest when they catch him looking at her all the time. One of his friends even went as far as to tell Hinazuki that he's interested in her, so they could have a conversation about it in private. Although this is not how he wanted it to go, he did want to get closer to her so he could prevent her kidnapping. They have a conversation where Hinzaki tells him that Satoru is a fake, just like her. This catches him off guard, but after a little introspection about himself, he realizes that this is true. He makes up a facade to be liked by everyone. Their conversation doesn't go very long, and they end up parting ways, but it wasn't a negative development. Satoru decides to go through the student anthology, where he reads an essay by Hinazuki. It's a dark essay, where she wants to go to an island, far away from the rest of the world, from the teachers, the students, and even her parents. Somewhere she can climb the trees whenever she wants. The thought of her being erased from everyone's mind was the only thing that soothed her. Satoru realizes that the only way to change the kidnapping event was to get closer to Hinazuki. She had always been isolated, which resulted in her becoming an easy victim. That night, he slept thinking about how to get closer to her and make her social one way or the other. The next day, he follows her to the park. The reason she goes there after school is because she hates going home. Her parents are violent and not kind to her. After following her to the park, he starts talking to her again. She mentions once again how he wears a facade all the time, but this time, the conversation doesn't just end there. He goes ahead and invites her to his birthday party. Hinazuki feels warmth in her heart after getting the invite, and she wonders if he's sure about it. He tells her that she is the first person to get the invitation. Hinzaki sees that Satoru's hands are a little cold after putting her hands on his. She tells him to wear gloves to make them warm, and leaves, saying that he's become easier to talk to recently. When she leaves the park, he makes a promise to himself to change the future into a brighter one. Satoru recalls that at the time of Hinazuki's death, she was only 10 years old. So, the goal was to make sure that she reaches her 11th birthday. If she successfully reaches that point, it will mean that the future was changed. For that to happen, he must find out when her birthday happens. On the next day after school, a fun small event is taking place amongst the boys as they're racing in pairs. The young Satoru is paired with Hamada, who is on the ice hockey team. He clearly is working hard on this aspect of life and trains daily. Everyone looks at Satoru and Hamada just as they're about to launch their race. Some students tell Hinazuki that she should wish Satoru luck since now everyone sees them as secret lovers. Hinazuki ends up saying some words of encouragement in her own way to Satoru. In return, Satoru promises that he'll do his best to win the race. When the race starts, Satoru ends up taking a solid lead. He even maintains it till the very end, which shocks everyone. However, just before he crosses the finish line, a thought bothers him. He thinks to himself that someone who trains daily should win this race, rather than someone who rarely does ice skating to begin with. He slows down at the last possible second, which is an advantage Hamad capitalizes on to snatch the lead. Everyone praises the mad skill of Hamada, but Hamada is infuriated at Satoru since he caught on to the fact that he slowed down. Hinzaki also heads away from there, and Satoru catches up with her. He tells her that this just wasn't his day, and that he'll do better next time, but Hinazuki is very observant. She had caught on to the fact that Satoru let Hamada win, and was offended by the fact that Satoru was not being transparent with her. He accepts his mistake, and tells her that he felt like Hamada deserved the win more. She tells him it's fine. After all, they're both fake people who put on a persona to survive. He also tried asking her about her birthday, but she didn't feel like telling him. Since this was too important to let slide, he rushed into the staff room where he was trying to find out about Hinazuki's record. Sadly, he gets caught by his homeroom teacher, Yoshiro. Surprisingly, this guy is very chill about it. He tells Satoru about the birthday of Hinazuki, and it turns out it's exactly on the same date as his. This would explain why she was shying away from telling him about it. Later that day, Satoru comes across Yuki, who takes him to his home. Yuki shows Satoru the plane he crafted from paper for the paper craft tournament. Talking to him, Satoru realizes that he's always been innocent. There is no way he could have been responsible for the murder and kidnapping of the children in this time. When leaving Yuki's home, he swears to himself that he'll find the real killer and save Hinazuki to change the future. The next stop he makes is to Hinazuki's home in hopes of getting closer to her even more. What he finds there takes him by shock. He sees Hinazuki's bag outside her home, with all her books scattered around the place. He sees a shed near her home and goes to it immediately. He opens it, and what he finds sends a disturbing chill down his spine. It was Hinazuki laying over there, covered in bruise. He shouts her name in hopes of waking her up. Then her mother arrives and simply snatches Hinazuki away from him. He mastered the strength to ask them how all those bruises covered her body. Hinazuki replies with a shaky voice, "She fell." Satoru felt a pain in his heart, and absolute disgust from her mother. It's clear that she had been abusing him very badly. Poor Hinzaki does not even have the courage to openly say that she's a victim. Later that night, Hinazuki's mother even went as far as to dip her face in freezing water so the bruises could heal faster. She struggles to breathe with each episode of this torture, but her mother feels no empathy whatsoever. The next day, Satoru decides to talk about the thing Hinzaki is going through to his homeroom teacher, Yoshiro. He tells Satoru that he's suspected this since last year, and they have been trying to get the children's welfare involved. But Hinazuki's mother is very good at covering her trail. She always finds a way to be innocent. The only thing they can do right now is wait. However, Satoru wasn't about to wait around. He knows what happens in the future if this keeps going the way it does, so he must take drastic action to prevent Hinzaki from ever being kidnapped. He continues to make efforts to get close to Hinazuki, and that day they decide to visit a snowy mountain to find a Christmas tree. It was a beautiful visit, and they even found 2 foxes who circled around them for a moment. They eventually found a beautiful tree and glared at it while holding hands. Hinazuki gives the biggest smile for the first time ever looking at it. The next episode starts with Satoru thinking about how only 1 week left till his and Hinazuki's birthday. He thinks to himself, if he can only ensure nothing happens to her in this time frame, he will have ensured that the future has indeed changed. Satoru has realized this much, that Hinazuki's mother abuses her each Saturday night, since that would explain why she's mostly late for school on Mondays. He talks with his mother about going on a date with Hinazuki on Saturday, and surprisingly, she agrees and is willing to give him some spending cash as well. On that very day, Satoru visits Hinazuki's home to ask permission from her mother to go out on Saturday. She obviously denies it for no good reason, since she abuses Hinazuki that day and takes all her stress out on her. However, Satoru's mother comes by over there as well, and the situation eventually turns into Satoru's favor. It was decided right there and then that they would go to the science center. Saturday arrives, and they do go on a date after all. Since Hinazuki is spending more time with Satoru, she's being tortured very little as well, since her mother tries her best to keep the abuse a secret. The date goes well, but then suddenly, a moment of realization hits Satoru. A realization that jolts him to the very core. He looks at Hinazuki and exchanges a dialogue with her. That dialogue was the exact one he shared with her as a kid. The only difference was that they came across each other over here instead of it being a planned date. This may seem like a small coincidence, but for Satoru, it was something nerve-wracking. He begins to ask himself, is he changing the past enough to alter the deaths of people? Or is he just making minor changes that won't have any effect on the end result? This realization hit him like a truck, and he began to take more drastic measures to get closer to Hinazuki. He would drop her off at her home and pick her up in the morning as well. Hold her hands in the school just to ensure she doesn't branch off and isolate herself again. He firmly believed that if she became more involved with people, she wouldn't be targeted. Then the birthday finally arrives. Satoru's friends and his mother organized 2 cakes for them since it was Hinazuki's birthday as well. Hinazuki couldn't finish the present she wanted to give to Satoru, and this made her tear up. But Satoru says that it's fine, he'll accept it later. They all had a fun time on the birthday, and for the first time ever, Satoru sleeps like a baby, feeling like he's changed the future since Hinazuki never reached her 11th birthday in the future. He was certain that Hinazuki's death had been prevented once and for all. However, he goes to school the next day, only to realize that Hinazuki didn't come. This leaves him spaced out his entire day at school. In the next episode, things take a turn for the worse, just when Satoru had begun to ease up. Hinazuki was supposed to give him his present today, and it was a promise she made. The fact that she didn't show up the next morning meant something was off. He runs straight to her home in hopes of getting to know if everything was all right. Nobody responded from her home, and the shed he once found her in was also empty. But there is one thing that shook him to the very core. It's the fact that there are footprints outside the shed, meaning there is a high chance of her being kidnapped from the shed. And then it happened. Hinazuki was missing, but the classroom teacher decided to tell everyone that Hinazuki was taken to her grandmother's. Satoru obviously confronts the homeroom teacher about this, knowing it to be a lie. Yoshiro advises him to go with the story for now until the case is resolved. But things took a turn only for the worse, as other students had begun disappearing as well. Hinazuki's mother also became a suspect in the case, but eventually the prime suspect came out to be Yuki. Almost 10 days after her kidnapping, Hinazuki's stuff was thrown out like garbage by her mother. Satoru witnesses this, and after examining the garbage, he found half-hand-knitted gloves. He realizes right there and then that those were the gifts Hinazuki had planned to give him for his birthday. Seeing those, he screamed as hard as he could and began running without any direction in denial. Suddenly, he gets transported back to the future. After being transported to the future, he realizes that he is still the prime suspect for his mother's murder, and no one is coming to save him. He scrams from one place to another to evade the cops and finally finds a temporary safe haven under a bridge. He begins to think about the case even more, brainstorming ways in which he can capture this murderer and put him to rest once and for all. However, for now, he needs someone whom he can trust. He calls up his manager at the pizza shop, who agrees to help him out. Thinking that he does not know how Satoru being a suspect on a murder scene, he thinks that he can stay by his manager's place. He tells his manager a lie that he had a fight with his mother and that he's been kicked out. At first, it seemed like the manager had bought into this lie, but this couldn't be further from the truth. He was planning to hand Satoru over to the cops. Satoru makes a run from his home as soon as he sees the house surrounded by cops and manages to flee in time. It was a close call, and he got lucky. He eventually comes across Airi, who brings him to her home. She knows how Satoru is a prime suspect in the murder of his mother, but she trusts him. She thinks it's impossible for Satoru to kill his mother, as he loves her too much. Satoru thinks that her home is a safe space and begins to investigate what happened in his childhood a bit more. He finds out that he did change the past a bit, but most of it is still the same. The victims are the same, only the date of their deaths has changed slightly. His investigation doesn't go far, and the manager soon discovers that Airi is keeping Satoru in her house. He tries to tell the cops about it, but Airi catches him doing it and slaps him in the face. She says that she trusts Satoru, and he should be doing the same. Satoru must move back to being under a random bridge after learning that the manager now knows that Airi is keeping him with her. Airi comes over there and talks with him. Satoru asks her why she's helping him out and why she trusts him this much. She replies that once her father was accused of stealing from the store. No matter how much he tried convincing people around him that he hadn't, no one would listen to him, even though he was innocent. The pain he felt of close ones not believing in him is carved deep into Airi's psyche. She believes in her heart that Satoru didn't do this murder, so she feels like it's her responsibility to stand up with him. Airi soon heads home. She soon gets a message from Satoru's mom's number. She realizes that it must be from the killer, And before she knew it, her home started to crumble in vicious flames out of nowhere. Satoru reaches the house in time luckily, and sees it burning right in front of him. He gets seriously worried about Eri's well-being, and doesn't think for a moment before rushing straight into her home to save her. He heads straight to her room, despite the flames having engulfed most of the room by then. He holds Eri over his shoulder, who's barely conscious because of all the polluted air. He manages to move her close to the exit a bit, but realizes soon that he's not strong enough to succeed. Luckily, he sees the manager rush into the house as well. He openly states that this is no job for a manga artist, and takes Eri onto his shoulder. He then tells him that it's best that Satoru flees from this place as fast as he could, since the police will be here at any moment. This will only result in him getting caught. Satoru makes his narrow escape from the scene and gets back on track to capturing the culprit at large. His obvious deduction was that this person is always close by and watching him. That would explain how he got to Eri. He then goes ahead and contacts the one person he thinks he can trust. He meets with him at a restaurant, and the man introduces himself as Sawada. Satoru naturally had his suspicions of being ratted out, but Sawada reassures him that he doesn't intend to do it. Sawada was a close friend of Sachiko, and he's convinced that there is no way a woman like that can raise a murderer. He also tells him that Sachiko recently contacted him. She told him that she became sure that the kidnapping of kids that happened many years ago had a culprit who wasn't even a suspect. According to her, there was a recent kidnapping attempt that she foiled, and the person who attempted it may have been the one who was behind all those kidnapping many years ago from when Satoru was just a boy. Sadly, she got murdered before he got a chance to talk to her in person about him. According to him, this only proves furthermore that the culprit is not Satoru. The kidnapper felt threatened about having his cover blown by Sachiko and erased her from the world. They both talk about the case of Hinazuki and how the culprit managed to frame Yuki for the wrongdoing, and ask Satoru if he's in the condition. Killing isn't the most dangerous thing this guy is capable of, it's how he manages to direct evidence at someone else. This infuriates Satoru, who is only thinking about how to take this guy out now. This guy killed Sachiko only a day after the kidnapping attempt was foiled. He probably saw Eri that day too, and went to the pizza shop to gain more information about her. After successfully knowing about her shifts, he caused a fire at the perfect time, ensuring Eri would be in her home. Meanwhile, Eri wakes up in the hospital. The detectives are praising the manager who saved Eri from the fire. They all think that it must be Satoru who was behind the fire to kill off Eri for not helping him escape the cops. Eri had close ties with Satoru, so she's being closely monitored by the police and can't leave the hospital. She eventually finds a way to contact Satoru, and they decide to meet up in a park, and Eri assures Satoru that she would be alone. They head to a more discreet place, which was under a bridge, and talk about who the real culprit could be. Their talk, however, does not last long at all as the police interrupt them out of nowhere. Satoru is handcuffed and is being taken to the police vehicle. A man with an umbrella with his face hidden gives him a smile, and he realizes instantly that he's the one who set Eri up and had the police follow her. He's very close to these people, and Satoru might just even know him. He shouts out, "Give me another chance," and he instantly visits the past once again as a kid. Revival happens once again, and Satoru gets teleported back in time to his childhood. This time it went back to when he went to the science center with Hinazuki. He vows to make this revival count for sure, calling it the final revival. Hinazuki has now become one of the members of Satoru's child gang. He maintains the theory that she needs to be close to him if she is to stand a chance of survival. This time, he vows to stick with her even more. One of his friends, Kenya, is quite observant. He asks Satoru about a book he lent him, and if he's gotten a chance to read it by any chance. The next day, Satoru tells Kenya that he is no longer in possession of the book since he can't remember ever asking for it in the first place. Kenya tells him that he wants to have a talk alone with him. They head to the stairways and Kenya tells him that there was no book to begin with. He then confronts that Satoru had been acting weird for a long time. It's like he's suddenly become this person who cares for everyone instead of putting up an act. Kenya asks him, what has inspired him to change this much? Satoru replies that he wants to become a superhero, and that's why he's doing his best to protect Hinazuki. Kenya tells him that he would like to help him any way he can. They both forge an alliance to do good for others right there and then. Even though Kenya has no idea what Satoru is trying to do at this point, All he knows for sure is that it is something good, and he will help his friend do it. For all he knows, Satoru is just trying to save Hinazuki from her abusive mother. They both decide to head back to the class. However, the class had started well before their arrival, and the teacher just told them to stand outside with the water buckets. Kenya just wonders how superheroes are always left with the short straw. Satoru then goes back to planning. He knows what he needs to do to prevent Hinazuki's death till their birthday. However, things go sideways after they celebrate their birthday, so he needs to act on that day. He knows for a fact that the killer tries to frame Yuki for this murder, so he needs to make an alibi for him. He visits Yuki and talks to him for a bit and asks him if he knows about Hinazuki. His reaction spoke louder than his words. It was clear that he knew about her. When Satoru told him that she now has friends, he was quite happy for Yuki. This explains why the killer had chosen him to be framed. Since he likes to hang out with kids, Hinazuki might have been one of the kids he was trying to get to know, but in a good way. However, his intention can clearly be read as a red flag if he were a suspect at a crime scene. He also asks Yuki if there is noise around their house at night, to which he replies with a no. This information is vital for him to execute his plans. He and Hinazuki have their birthdays celebrated, just like in the last revival. But this time around, he does things differently. As soon as the party ends, he goes straight back to Yuki's house late at night. Just like he had thought, there was no one around, and he successfully threw a rock straight at one of the house's windows. He expects them to call the police, and this way, the police themselves will be Yuki's alibi, since he couldn't have murdered anyone when some police members themselves testify to his innocence. On his way back, he sees Hinazuki's mother walking back to her home. The sight of her sends him over the top, and his blood begins to boil. He chases her with a vicious killer intent, but suddenly, Kenya appears behind him to stop him. Kenya tells Satoru that doing something like that would be overboard. He understands that Satoru just wishes to protect Hinazuki, but this will only bring about more chaos. He goes back to his home, and everyone is still at the birthday party, including Hinazuki. He tells everyone that he's going to walk Hinazuki home himself. Hinazuki agrees to it, and they both head to her home holding hands. Somewhere along the way, he tells her that he's going to kidnap her to prevent any further abuse from her mother. She thinks this is stupid, and Satoru proudly accepts that this idea is stupid. But Hinazuki goes along with it since she feels so safe with him. Satoru takes her to an old abandoned bus, where Kenya is waiting for them. They renovate it a bit and light the area up with a heater. Kenya says this place isn't half bad, and he wouldn't really mind staying here. Satoru's plan is to not only keep Hinazuki safe, where the kidnapper can't figure out where she is, but he also hopes that since Hinazuki will now be missing, her mother will have no choice but to get the cops involved. After getting them involved, her abusive nature can finally come to light. This would mean that child welfare can easily get involved and take Hinazuki into their custody. Once that happens, the killer would have no chance of ever getting close to Hinazuki, since he only goes for isolated children to cover his tracks. A night goes by, and Hinazuki is missing, but her mother hasn't reported it to the police because of the fear of her abuse being revealed. The next night, when Hinazuki is sleeping in the bus, she hears a strange sound in the middle of the night that wakes her up. She suddenly realizes that someone has entered the bus, but can't see her since there is a curtain between him and her. She knows that this can't be Satoru. A sound of a huge smash comes from the other side, and she gets afraid but holds her scream. The man soon leaves the bus. The next day, Satoru takes an early start to the day, since he has to do his best to ensure that Hinazuki is all right, all alone on the bus. He wakes up early and surprisingly finds his mom ready to cook an early breakfast for him, right there and then. While having breakfast, she asks him what he intends to do by going out this early in the morning. She doesn't pry into the details, but looks closely into his eyes and asks him if it's something bad, to which Satoru replies that it's not something bad. She can read Satoru like an open book and decides that there is no need for further investigation. What Satoru must be doing is probably best for everyone. Satoru heads straight to the bus and gives Hinazuki his lunchbox so she'd have something to eat. They have a little talk, and Satoru heads straight to the school. Meanwhile, in the school, everyone is wondering why on earth Hinazuki is absent for 2 days in a row. The sensei tries to calm the air and tells everyone that she'll probably turn up in a day or two, and that's something not to worry about. However, It's pretty obvious that he's also worried, so he has a little chat with Satoru in the staff room after the class ends. He tells Satoru that he seems quite calm despite Hinazuki not showing up for 2 days in a row. Satoru simply replies that he must remain calm in times like these, but in reality, he's calm because he's the one who's kidnapped her. The sensei then tells him that the child welfare intends to visit Hinazuki's mother later tonight since she's been missing for some time, and her sudden removal from class hasn't even been reported to the school by her mother. This fills Satoru with glee, as he's confident that child welfare will take custody of Hinazuki entirely after visiting her mother, who won't be able to explain why she doesn't have her daughter. The sensei and the child welfare team visit Hinazuki's home, but sadly, she doesn't respond to the door. The child welfare team has their suspicions aroused further about something being off with Hinazuki's mother, but they can't really do anything about it right now. Just as they're about to leave, the sensei proposes that they look into the house for a bit without anyone's consent. He tells them he'll take full responsibility if something were to go sideways. After looking into the house for a bit, they realize that the mother probably left not too long ago. She must have figured out that child welfare was arriving and wouldn't know what to say. Obviously, she panicked and decided to make a run for it. However, they all deduce that she probably has no choice but to come back eventually. Meanwhile, Satoru and his gang members are with Hinazuki in the abandoned bus, having the time of their lives. During their talk, Hinazuki tells everyone that a man came by last night on the bus. He seemed angry about something and kicked very hard outside her curtain. She became very scared, but managed to keep herself from shouting out loud. Satoru and his friends investigate the outside of the curtain and find a footprint on the outside of a box. When he saw the footprint, it sent shivers down his spine. These were the exact same footprints that were present on the outside of Hinazuki's shed when she was murdered in the original timeline. They also notice a small additional bag over there. Kenya opens it up to reveal its contents. What came out shook Satoru to the very core. No one else could understand what they were looking at. They were everyday things like boots, tape, freezer spray, rope, and gloves. But Satoru knew exactly who left them there. It was the killer. He discarded those things after his attempt to kill Hinazuki was foiled. No one else could grasp the magnitude of what was going on there. But Satoru looked like he had seen a ghost. He realized how close things almost went exactly the way they did last time. This bus had always been a central part of the kidnapping that was never revealed in the future. They have to immediately move Hinazuki away from the spot for their own sanity, and Satoru still has a plan. He goes straight to his home with Kenya and Hinazuki. She tells his mom exactly what he's doing, and that's saving Hinazuki from her mother's abuse. Surprisingly, the mother also decides to go along with the kidnapping and agrees to keep Hinazuki in her home. They spend a nice night together. Hinazuki and Sachiko even have a bath together, where we see Hinazuki be cheerful and happy for the first time. The next morning, Hinazuki is served a breakfast that Satoru eats daily, made by his mother. She wonders how she was given bland toast by her mother every morning. Her fate had turned around for the better, for the first time in her life, and she begins to shed tears. It doesn't take long for those tears to take the form of a fully fledged cry of happiness straight from her heart. Both Satoru and Sachiko let Hinazuki cry her heart out, seeing clearly that she felt safe for the first time in a long while. Meanwhile, her mother is losing it in her home and angry at the thought of Hinazuki not coming back. At the same time, she can't report this incident to the officials, thinking that she may lose custody of Hinazuki if they become involved. Just as Hinazuki's mom is freaking out in her home and destroying everything in her sight, Satoru and her mother decide to visit her along with Hinazuki. The bell rings and it freaks her out, but she decides to answer anyway. She sees Hinazuki standing in front of her. There is no sign of relief from her, and she only gets angrier at Hinazuki furthermore. She asks her where she has been for the past few days. She doesn't reply, and Satoru, along with Sachiko, comes closer to confront her as well. Looking at them, Hinazuki's mother gets even angrier. She says that she should have known that they would be behind this. Sachiko doesn't flinch, knowing in her heart that what she did was the right thing. Hinazuki's mother goes completely frantic and grabs a shovel nearby. She takes a huge swing straight at Sachiko. However, Satoru pulls her mother back, and Hinazuki tries to control her by grabbing her. What's amazing is that Sachiko still doesn't flinch at all. She tells her that the only person she cares about is herself. Not long after, child welfare appeared out of nowhere. They saw the whole thing and clearly saw how Hinazuki's mother needed mental therapy. It became clear to them that Hinazuki can't stay with her mother anymore. It gave them all the evidence they needed to take full custody of Hinazuki. Hinazuki's mother realizes that this was a setup to expose what she had been doing to Hinazuki all along, and there was nothing she could do now. Just as it seemed like things might escalate further, Hinazuki's grandmother comes out of nowhere. She begs child welfare to give her custody of Hinazuki. She gets down on her knees and tries her best to convince them that her daughter is not a bad woman. Her husband used to torture her and eventually left her. She was a great mother until then, but after becoming a single mom and going through all the trauma, she changed and began to take it all out on Hinazuki. This brings Hinazuki's mother to tears as well. In the end, Hinazuki's grandmother takes Hinazuki with her. As she's leaving the town, she looks at Satoru through the back window of the car. Without realizing it, Satoru also starts to follow the car, realizing that this might be the last time he'll meet Hinazuki. He follows and follows, but the car only becomes more and more distant. Eventually, he gives in and glares at Hinazuki, disappearing into the distance. The next day, Satoru's homeroom teacher asks him to visit him in the staff room. He tells Satoru in private that Hinazuki's grandmother now has full custody of her. Meanwhile, her mom won't be seeing her for a while. The sensei tells Satoru what an amazing boy he's been, and that his bravery is the reason Hinazuki is now safe. Satoru definitely deserves an award for what he did, but according to him, the smile on Hinazuki was reward enough. However, just because Hinazuki is safe now doesn't mean that the day is saved. Aside from Hinazuki, the killer also had 2 more victims that now need to be saved. Satoru goes on his regular investigation, trying to get to know their routines. He figures out that it's obvious the remaining 2 victims also spend a lot of time alone. This can make them easy targets. When he's following Hiromi, one of the victims-to-be, he comes across his mother, who had bought so much from shopping that she wasn't able to carry it at all. He asks Satoru for help, and he ends up having to carry a heavy load. Not long after, they come across his sensei. He agrees to pick them up and take them home. Satoru tells him that he's quite the lifesaver, since what Satoru and Sachiko were carrying was quite heavy. Sachiko fell asleep in the back, since she was quite tired. Satoru and his sensei have a small talk. Satoru asks him why he isn't married, to which Satoru replies that he's just a cautious man, and that marriage is no joke. While they're talking, Satoru takes note of a strange paper sticking out of the car's glove box. He gets curious and pulls it out. The sensei reacts abruptly and tries to stop him, but Satoru has already opened the box. What came out took Satoru by surprise. The glove box was full of candies. The sensei admits that when he quit smoking, he had no other thing that could distract him aside from candies. The sensei immediately takes one in his mouth, and it's obvious that he was craving them. Satoru joins in as well. His mother from the back also wakes up and decides to get in on the candy action. The next day, when he goes back to school, Kenya takes note of Satoru's actions. Despite having saved Hinazuki, he was still acting weird, like he was still trying to save someone. He comes clean to Kenya that he was trying to save Hinazuki from her mother, but that just wasn't it. He was also trying to save Hinazuki from a killer. He fears that the killer will aim to take out more kids now that Hinazuki is safe. That day, he walks Hiromi to his home along with him, knowing that he's the next victim. After ensuring that Hiromi is safe and doesn't become the second victim, Satoru now lays his eyes on the third and final victim, Aya Nakanishi. Unlike the remaining 2, who were a bit more approachable, this one is far out of reach. She's actually from the same class, but their gang has never interacted with her. So the first thing Satoru has to do is to start talking to her. Satoru obviously doesn't have any confidence talking to a girl, so he decides to approach Nakanishi with Kenya and his entire gang. Nakanishi is someone who spends most of her time alone as well, a trait shared by nearly all the victims from the future. Satoru introduces himself and his gang, but she doesn't seem interested in them in the slightest. She says that she recognizes them and that their whole gang trespasses an abandoned warehouse. Satoru tells her that the building is their hideout. She then proceeds to make fun of the hideout and tells them that all the boys are like this, thinking they're some kind of superheroes. This rubs Satoru the wrong way since he really loves superheroes. He gets pissed off, and Kenya has to control him. Regardless of the cold shoulder she gave them on their first interaction, she still has to be saved from being killed. The gang then invites her to their hideout when she leaves, hoping that she'll change her mind and swing by the next day. She can play cool all she wants, but in the end, she's also just a kid from elementary school, and hideouts fascinate her more than she would like to let on. She obviously shows up to the hideout the next day, saying that she did not have anything better to do. Now that Satoru has gotten close to her, he has to figure out who the killer is to begin with. He begins to suspect his sensei, since he had a ton of candies with him in his car's glove compartment. However, he shakes the feeling off almost immediately, since he's known him for a long time. In fact, he's almost like a father figure to him at this point. He then learns that a girl going by the name of Misato has become isolated by the whole class. Sensei convinced her to go on and cheer for the hockey team. Since Satoru's conclusion is that the killer only goes for isolated victims, he began to think that he might have changed the future so much at this point that the killer might go for someone different than the original 3 victims. He reaches the gym where the hockey team practices and finds Misato sitting all alone, being the perfect victim for the serial kidnapper. He then sees her go to the toilet and follows her there. Obviously, he doesn't go inside, but he stays outside and keeps watch. He soon realizes that she's taking a bit way too long and begins to get anxious. He makes a run for it, and just before he can enter the toilet, his sensei appears out of nowhere. He tells Satoru that he had to take a lollipop break. Sensei tells him that Misato has already left from the back, perhaps, and Satoru sees Yuki's truck outside from behind. This rings an alarm in Satoru's head. It's no coincidence that the killer tried to frame Hinazuki's murder on Yuki, and his truck is here when Satoru suspects that Misato might become the new victim in this timeline. He asks Sensei to follow the truck in his car, thinking that Misato's body might be in it, or she may be alive in it. He tells his sensei that his gang and he are pretending that a kidnapper is prowling around, and they befriend anyone who is isolated, so their chances of getting kidnapped are reduced. The sensei doesn't consider his games childish, as he feels like what Satoru is doing is quite a brave thing that is getting results. He helps Satoru buckle his belt and starts talking about this detective thing even more. Then the sensei starts acting strange. He becomes more and more curious about this kidnapper that is after these kids. According to Satoru, he's just playing a game, but the sensei starts to inquire like it's not a game. He tells Satoru that he's taking this quite seriously, as if it's more than just a game, as if the killer really is out there. Satoru begins to feel a bit uneasy around his sensei. He seemed to give off more and more of a threatening vibe as the conversation furthers even more. Something didn't feel right at all. However, he tries to shake the feeling, since this is someone he's known for a long time. But things take a turn for the worse when Sensei left following the truck. The truck went to the right, and he took a left. He slowly begins to confess and open up about who he really is. He confesses to Satoru that he's, in fact, the killer that Satoru is after. He had tried to capture Hinazuki only to realize that the person he wanted to frame had police over his house, and Hinazuki was not in her shed. The sensei also tried his best to kidnap Hiromi, but that failed as well because Satoru and Sachiko were following him. The next episode begins with the story of Yashiro, the killer disguised as a teacher. He narrates his tale about how one of his classmates brought a lot of hamsters to the class. She couldn't take care of this many hamsters. She only wanted 2 of them, but they had mated and made many more. The killer, who was just a child at the time, took all the hamsters for himself. What he did next establishes him as a real sociopath. He filled a jar with water and drowned them all. He came back after a few hours and was amused at what he saw. One of the hamsters had survived by standing on the floating dead body of one of his siblings. Yashiro was simply amazed by what he had witnessed. He decided to keep that hamster for himself as a pet and named it Spice. His behavior reminded him of an interesting short story known as The Spider's Thread. In the story, one person had committed hideous atrocities in his lifetime. He had murdered one person after the other and was sent to hell at the time of his death. But he did do one nice thing in his lifetime. He spared a spider out of pure compassion. So the gods let down a thread as narrow as a spider's web. He could use it to pull himself back up to heaven. He tried his best to climb the web, but people around him tried to climb it as well. Eventually, because of all the people around him, the thread broke, and he was cast into hell once and for all. The killer, Yashiro, then confesses that he's been seeing that spider's web on the heads of many people since he got that hamster. On whomever the spider's thread would appear, he'd have to make sure he kills that person. It appeared on Hinazuki, Hiromi, and even Masato. However, all of his attempts at murder had been foiled, all thanks to one child, and it was Satoru. Then he saw the spider's thread on his head as well and decided to kill him. Unfortunately, Yashiro did not succeed. 15 years had passed since the murder attempt of Satoru was made by Yashiro. He survived, but he had been in a coma for the last 15 years until today. He opened his eyes for the first time near his mother, Sachiko. She broke into tears, seeing her son wake up for the first time in over 15 years. The doctor soon saw him and was amazed that he was able to talk very well, even though he had been in a coma for over 15 years. It turns out, his mother had been taking very good care of him for the longest time. She'd take care of his muscles by giving them exercises and massages regularly. She even bought an expensive machine that optimized his recovery even more. With that being said, he still needed to do physiotherapy to be able to walk again. He gets a visit from his old friends. The first ones to visit him were Kenya and Hiromi. They were both great students, so needless to say, they both became successful. Kenya became a lawyer and Hiromi became a doctor. It felt like they both wanted to ask him something important, but they couldn't bring themselves to actually do it. It was obvious that his mother had told them to talk only about trivial stuff and not something serious, as it may be too much for Satoru. The thing is, Satoru in his current state can't remember anything about the past. He can't even remember what happened to him that led to him suffering from a coma for over 15 years. Sometime after the visit of Kenya and Hiromi, Hinazuki also visits Satoru. The sight of Hinazuki holding a baby made Satoru break into tears. He was so happy for Hinazuki, and she tells him that this wouldn't have been possible without his help. Hinazuki confesses that she thought she'd always be alone. However, that changed when Satoru came into her life for the first time and saved her from the abuse of her mother. It felt wrong for her to be happy while Satoru stayed in a coma. Satoru reassures her that he has no regrets in his life and that he's happy for Hinazuki. After she leaves, Satoru wonders why she was thankful to him. He can't even remember what he did to save Hinazuki. That's just how much he's lost his memory. After a while, Yashiro also decides to visit him. He was the killer, but he knows for a fact that Satoru's memory hadn't come back at all. So, he just comes to him as a regular sensei. They both have a nice chat about trivial matters. Eventually, he gets him all alone in an elevator and takes him to the hospital top. After coming to the top of the hospital, Satoru immediately tells Yashiro that he has regained all of his memories and that he had been playing dumb. He also informed Kenya and Hiromi of how he got his memories back as well. After telling them, he confesses that he didn't want to tell anyone about the murderer since it happened 15 years ago, and most of the evidence would have been wiped out anyway. After a little persuasion from Kenya, he ends up telling him that the person who attempted to murder Satoru was none other than Yashiro-sensei himself. After hearing how Satoru had regained all his memories, Yashiro became a little more vigilant, but could still read Satoru like an open book. He immediately infers that Satoru probably has a phone in his pocket with a call connected to Kenya. Yashiro takes the phone and cuts the call. The reason Yashiro had brought him over here is that he wanted to know how Satoru managed to prevent each and every one of his killings. It was almost as if he could see the future. After talking to Satoru for a bit, he concludes that maybe it really was nothing more than dumb luck. Yashiro then tells Satoru that he'll never be able to catch him. There is a cancer patient girl in the hospital whose IV drip is soon to start. Yashiro had changed the bag with a muscle relaxant, and that bag has Satoru's fingerprints all over it. Yashiro then tells Satoru that he plans on killing him and framing him for the murder of that poor girl. Satoru eventually understands the psychology of Yashiro. He tells him that there was no bluff. The reason he managed to save everyone was that he knew Yashiro better than anyone. It's also the reason he managed to survive for so long. Yashiro responded that he could have killed Satoru anytime he wanted, but Satoru replies that he just couldn't do it. It's because, according to Satoru, he filled the hole in Yashiro's heart. There was no one on this planet who understood Yashiro better than Satoru. This is exactly why, in the span of the entire 15 years, he hadn't killed Satoru even though he could have done that at any moment. saying that Satoru uses his wheelchair to charge straight off the hospital edge, but his theory proved to be correct. Yashiro caught him at the last moment because, in the end, he really did have a special connection with Satoru. However, he soon lets him go and then decides to jump off the hospital himself as well. To his surprise, he sees Satoru on a trampoline with all his friends waiting for him right there. It was his plan all along to jump from the building and have Yashiro confess his sins. In the end, Yashiro is finally caught and has to pay a heavy price for his sins. The calamity finally settles, and after a while, Satoru finds himself making a living as a manga artist. He returns to the same manager he approached at the beginning of his journey. However, this time, he carries himself with a newfound respect, for Satoru's manga has gained immense popularity. Just as he is about to leave the company, the manager takes a moment to congratulate him on the remarkable achievement of having his manga adapted into a successful anime. Stepping outside, Satoru takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past lift slightly. Yet he realizes that he has never truly experienced a revival after finally capturing Yashiro. In that moment of reflection, something magical begins to unfold. As the snow falls heavily around him, a girl approaches, seeking refuge under the shelter of a bridge where he stands. She gently asks if she can share the shelter with him. With tears streaming down his face, he nods in acceptance, for this girl is none other than Ayuri, the one who believed in him when the world had turned its back. In that poignant moment, he comprehends that fate has granted him another chance at happiness. The anime concludes with Satoru uttering his final words, filled with hope and conviction. "I've always believed."